Hello, welcome to my show on interpersonal communication. My name is Dr. Marquita Byrd. My students refer to me as Dr. B. And today I'm here to talk about something that's very important with us, and that's emotional literacy. I have taught communication studies in major universities for 45 years, and now this show is my opportunity to teach the public and the general community about communication studies, and I'm really enjoying doing that. I have two goals today, which is one, to help you to improve your lives through knowing more about interpersonal communication, and secondly, to help facilitate your acquisition of knowledge and skills that would allow you to do that, hence the lectures on interpersonal communication. Today we're going to talk specifically about emotional literacy. And wow, that is a hot topic today, emotional literacy, because so many things are happening in our nation that show us that we need to work on understanding our feelings, understanding the feelings of others, and how to manage them so that we can live with social sustainability. You may be wondering, what the heck is social sustainability? Social sustainability is living in a society where we manage our resources and we work with each other so that today we have everything that we need to survive, and that we have a society that lasts until the next 8 generations. Social sustainability. So today we're going to talk about emotions. They're important because guess what? We all have emotions. We live in a Euro-Western nation, and that tells us that we shouldn't be discussing emotions. We don't talk about them very often. We want to talk about information. But emotions are central to the human experience. We don't want to hear about them. If you have parents like me, when we were having discussions, they would say, "I don't really care what you feel. Just listen to what I'm telling you and do it." Wow, that is pretty repressive. So we need to think about our emotions in terms of our family relations, our job, and in all areas where we talk to other human beings. Never say, "I don't care what you feel." At work, we see this at work very often, and this plays out in workplaces where they're very diverse. Often bosses who tend to be more Eurocentric will say, "I don't want to hear what you're feeling. I just give me the facts." When there's a conflict, let's say two workers come to each other, just give me the facts. But the facts are not the underlying issue. First, you have to talk about emotions. And wow, do we see things like that going on in our workplaces with mass shootings and other sorts of things, because people are not being taught how to manage their emotions. And I will say that this is not a thing that your workplace can do. It's something that you need to do at home. Now, emotions are great because they are our first line of understanding what's happening. Emotions are necessary and important for human beings to survive. Let's take, for example, the emotion of love. Love allows our parents and our families to bond with the child. An infant is not going to survive if it doesn't have adults who are bonding with it and taking care of it. Love does that. We even know that human beings are programmed to like little round faces with big eyes. And you know we do that. And that helps us to love the baby and take care of it. Sadness. Sadness might indicate that something is wrong and that you may need to take a look at your life and what's going on. Anger. Wow, all of us feel anger sometimes. And this may let us know that we're frustrated, or, for example, children get angry often because they are frustrated. Joy. Joy, I hope we all have. In fact, the Buddha says that the goal in life is to have joy in the midst of suffering. That we all suffer, but that we all have to find joy while we're suffering. Joy may be a sign that you're feeling content and that things are going well, that you're feeling self-satisfied. So I'm hoping that everybody today will leave with a little bit of joy. So just tell me the facts. Just tell me what's important does not work in terms of managing emotions. And this comes from a reluctance to discuss emotions. In Euro-Western tradition, we tend to think that thinking is better than feelings, and that thinking is logical, it's reasoned, you can control it, and emotions are not. If you watch Star Trek, You may see them talk about going to Kolinar so that they can learn how to control their emotions. It's not that Vulcans don't feel emotions, it's that they learn to manage them, to manage their emotions. Now, you may be saying, what are some of the indicators that we need to talk about emotions more? Well, the suicide rate is up. And the suicide rate is up from 2000. That's 20 years. And it's up for various reasons going on in the country, but we've seen an uptick during the pandemic because people are feeling isolated, they're feeling lonely, they're feeling stressed. There's a Netflix show called 13 Reasons Why, and I haven't been able to get myself to watch it because it's about teenage suicide. But we do have suicide rising among teenagers. Another one, A Million Little Things. Same story, but among 30-something. So we see suicides rising. We know that, for example, men tend to die 10 years younger than women. Our insurance actuarial tables tell us that. One of the hypotheses is that they die sooner is because we tell men, don't talk about your feelings, don't let anybody know how you feel, don't go get help, don't go get counseling, because we teach men that it's strong not to talk to you about your feelings, but in fact it can increase stroke rate, it increases heart attacks, and that's not a good thing. So we need for our men to learn how to handle their emotions. And we make a mistake when we say men don't feel. That is not true. Men do feel, but we teach them how to handle them in a different way. So we want to look at our society and see what indicators we have where we're not managing our emotions well, and how we can learn how to do it better. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is an emotion? We know we say that it is a feeling. There are three ways to respond to our environment. The first is thinking, which is mental activity, what we think about something. The second is behavior, and that is the actions that we take. What do we do? Emotions, we can respond to our environment through emotions, and that has to do with what we feel about what we've experienced. And so that's the three ways that we can respond to our environment. Now, it's very important to understand that emotions are internal. Nobody knows what you're feeling unless you manifest it through your words or your behavior. Let me give you an example. Sometimes in abusive relationships, a person will say, they may hurt their partner. They may be physically violent with their partner. And then say, but you know I love you. You know I love you, right? Well, saying I love you means nothing if you don't treat me in a loving manner. So emotions are internal states, and you can't share them. The other person can't know them unless you talk about them or you share them through your behavior. That's very, very important. So when you say, I love you, I didn't buy you any flowers for your birthday, but you know I love you. Nah, you got to buy the flowers too. So they're internal. So we're going to talk about emotions. We're going to talk about emotional literacy. You might have heard the term emotional quotient. And that is a term that came into play in the 80s. And it has to do with understanding our emotions. Emotional literacy. The first step is to develop your ability to be aware of what you're feeling. Sometimes we're taught to press our feelings down, or we're feeling things that we don't feel comfortable with, so we ignore them. But the first part of literacy is to, one, become aware of what you are feeling. And then the second part is to be able to recognize emotions in other people. It's not just enough that you know what you're feeling, but you got to understand. You can't understand completely, but you can get a feel for what the other person may be feeling. And thirdly, then develop empathy. And empathy is the ability to feel with others. For example, let's say you see someone on the street who's maybe hungry or asking for money for food. Empathy allows you to say, stop your car or stop where you are and give that person some money. Empathy is the ability to feel with other people. Emotional literacy is an important part of having a sustainable society. If I never understand how you feel, I don't even know how I feel, then we tear up our society, and that's not what we want to do. I have 4 ideas I'm going to talk about today, now that I've finished the introduction. The first is talking about the validity of emotions. The second point is the need for emotional vocabulary. The third is to be able to make safe space to talk about emotions. We hear on our workplaces now all the time about safe spaces. And the fourth, give us some guidelines for effective use of emotions. So those are 4 things we want to talk about today. Now let's talk about emotions and their validity. Sometimes, well, all of us probably are taught there are good emotions and bad emotions. For example, we're taught that love is a good emotion and that hatred is a bad emotion. You should never feel it. In fact, all emotions are valid. There's no good emotions or bad emotions. What we're talking about is how we handle the emotions. For example, love, which we all think is a good thing, we can use that in a way that becomes negative in our lives. For example, you love someone so much that you want to own them and you never want them to be out of your eyesight. Well, that doesn't make for a good interpersonal relationship. So let's talk about that, how we can use our emotions. The first way is that we can use our emotions in a facilitative manner. Facilitative means that you use them so that they improve your relationship, they improve your situation, they improve what's going on between you and another person. Facilitate. Or you can use it in a debilitative manner, which means that you allow your emotions to make your experience negative, harmful, and therefore not effective. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, this is an old example, but I like to use it. My son was in high school, and he is a disabled student, but he had an opportunity to work in the cafeteria. And the cafeteria lady was always talking to him about what he was eating. And I knew he was upset with it because he kept coming home saying, the cafeteria lady says I shouldn't have chips, or I shouldn't have soda, I shouldn't have this, I shouldn't have that. After a while, I got angry and I got upset because he was upset. So I decided to go to the school. Now, if I was using my emotions in a facilitative way, I would go and talk to the cafeteria lady and ask her to not do that. If I use them in a debilitative way, maybe I would allow myself to get angry, go down to the school, cuss out the school lady, the cafeteria lady, and make the situation worse for my son. So you may be interested in what I actually did. I did make an appointment, so don't just show up at the school. I made an appointment, and I made an opportunity to see the lady that works in the cafeteria, and I told her about how my son was feeling. So I spoke to her about the fact that my son was very upset about her talking about what he ate. I explained to her that he was 17 years old, that he was working in the cafeteria to make his own money to buy his lunch, and he wanted to buy lunch like the other kids bought lunch. He's 17, and he didn't get to do a lot of things that other kids did. So I asked her to stop talking to him about what he ate at lunch. I felt comfortable doing that because he had a good breakfast, because I cooked it. He had a good dinner, and so he could have some chips and a soda for lunch. Now, that resulted in her changing her behavior toward him. She did tell me, though, that the reason she talked to him was because he was falling at work, and she felt that he was doing that because he had poor nutrition. The fact of the matter is, we found out later that he was falling because he had muscular dystrophy, and it had been undiagnosed. But I was able to, because I used my emotions in a facilitated way, to get information from the lady who worked in the cafeteria that I didn't have, that he was falling down at work. And she was able to understand his feelings better. That's using emotion in a facilitated way. We have so many instances where school teachers and principals talk to children, and parents come there and they say curse words to them, they become physically belligerent with them. That's using your emotions in a debilitative way, and that doesn't improve anything for your child. So we want to go away with, from this point, understand that all emotions are valid. There's no invalid emotions. What we do have is how we use the emotions. For example, people say, well, I just hate such and such a person. And again, we're taught not to hate. But if you hate someone, that means that you probably need to get away from them. You need to do something to change the situation so that things are better. But in life, when we say we hate situations, like I hate the fact that we have child molesters. So I don't go out and hunt down child molesters. What I do is I try to work to help children be safe and help parents know how the children be safe. So I use my emotions in a facilitative manner. So point one is that emotions all are valid. There are no bad or good emotions, and that it has to do with how we use them that impacts on our relationships. So far, we've been talking about emotions, and we talked about the what emotions are. We talked about the fact that all emotions are valid, and now we're going to go to our second point, which is that we need to establish an emotional vocabulary. Often people say, well, why is it that people don't talk about emotions? Part of the reason is because we don't have a vocabulary. Many families don't teach their children how to talk about emotions, and therefore they have no way of discussing them as they grow older. And I'll give you an example again. I give a lot of examples from raising my son, who is a differently able person. And I have a PhD and a master's and an undergraduate degree in communication studies, but I learned more about communication studies from raising him than I did from any class. And so one of the things, we had an experience one day. He was very happy. He was very joyful. And we got up and we went to the laundromat to wash clothes, and then we watched cartoons, and then we ducked the house, and he kept saying, "Mom, I love you." And he said it over and over, "Mom, I love you." But each time he said it, he meant something different. And I finally realized he was trying to share his emotions and feelings, but he had no vocabulary. So I started to paying attention to what he's doing when he's saying, "Mom, I love you." So we were watching TV, and he said, "Mom, I love you." And I said, "Are you happy that you and Mommy are watching cartoons together?" "Yes, I'm happy." So now he's got a word that he can put to his feelings. So then we're out in the car, we're riding around, and, "Mom, I love you." "Are you excited that we're out on the ride together?" "Yes, I'm excited." "Mom, I love you." "Are you looking forward to, or are you excited about going to the store?" "Yes, I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited. I'm happy." So in that way, I was able to help him get a vocabulary to talk about his emotions. And now he can talk about emotions very effectively. He can tell me what he's feeling. And he still has some difficulty, but I continue to supply words. Very, very important that we supply emotional vocabulary words for our children and even for adults. I was in church one Sunday, and we were in the middle of a church service, and there was a little girl about 18 months old, was in the pew, and another baby came in who was about her age, and it was a boy, and she was all excited because it was a boy. And she kept trying to get his attention, and then she finally decided she was going to climb over the pew. She climbed over, and she fell on the floor. And so all of us who saw it, we wanted to laugh so bad, but we couldn't because the preacher was preaching. But her mother picked her up and said to her, "Now you feel embarrassed." What a lesson. The emotion that the child was feeling, her mother supplied the word right then. "Now you're feeling embarrassed." So now she knows what that word means and to apply it to when she's feeling that way. And lastly, I have two sons. They're 9 years apart. And my 15-year-old had an opportunity for his first time to spend the night at somebody else's house. And he was very excited. And he asked me, "Mom, can I have a stick and a pillowcase?" I guess he was going to be like Tom Sawyer and, put his clothes in a pillowcase. And so I said, "We have a suitcase. You don't have to do that." But anyway, he left. And my youngest son, he was moping around. He was looking sad. And he didn't want to go outside and play and looking lonely. And I said to him, and I tried to play with him and talk to him, but that's not like having your brother talk to you. And I finally said, "Do you miss your brother?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Do you feel sad that your brother's not here?" "Yes, I feel sad." And I had the most wonderful moment when his brother came home. He ran up to him and he said, "I missed you." And they kissed each other on the lips. And those of you who are old school like me, you know what a Kodak moment is. That was the Kodak moment, a picture perfect moment. Two brothers, one very tall, one short, kissing each other because they missed each other. So we have to supply emotional vocabulary. Now the thing is, if you grew up in a family like mine, we didn't talk about emotions. They only talked about being angry. No one ever said, "I love you." Nobody ever said, "I like you." Anything like that. Only when they were angry. So I was fortunate enough to be a reader. emotional vocabulary comes from novels. I started reading novels when I was 13, and I read hundreds of novels from 13 until I graduated from high school, and then even more. So I was able to gather my own emotional vocabulary from reading. But as parents, we need to start supplying our children and helping them to get vocabulary to talk about emotions. Otherwise, they have no way of discussing and talking about what they're feeling. That means you're closed in. Your feelings are caged in because you can't talk about them. So let's get an emotional vocabulary, and you can start that by talking to your children about how they might be feeling at a particular instance. And also another great activity is to make a list of emotional words, not thinking words, emotional words, how you feel, and talking about those. So we talked about emotional vocabulary, and we've talked about the way that emotions are valid. Now let's go on to talk about 3, how people don't feel safe. Wow. Often, number 3, people don't have a safe place to talk about emotions. So often, let's talk about safety. When people talk about emotions, they're making themselves vulnerable. They're opening themselves up. They're showing their feelings, and they may be very tender. And so when you talk about emotions, it can be very risky. It is very risky. It's always risky, because you don't know how the listener is going to handle your feelings. So we have to make safe places. For example, I'm not ashamed to admit this, there were times when I hated my parents. My parents were very controlling. I couldn't date even when I was 18. I had to do whatever they said. I had to wear the clothes that my mother bought me. I had to wear my hair the way she told me. And so there was a point at which I hated them. But I could never say I hate you unless I was willing to die. So when I raised my children, I sat down and told them that there is a time when you will hate me, and some days I might hate you. And it's okay to say, Mom, today, or right now, I hate you. So we're going to time it. We're going to put it in a time frame, not forever. I don't hate you forever, Mom. But today, I hate you. They could not raise their voice. They could not slam things. They could not say curse words. But they could say, I hate you. That was good, because that allowed me to understand how they were feeling about what was going on, and then I could try to correct it. I could try to help us to work through it as a family. But if I don't know what they're feeling, then, and they're not in a safe place, then I could never know. So I never chastised them for that. I would say, I'm glad you told me. I'm glad we could talk about it. Let's figure out what we can do about it. And then there would be days when they would get on my nerves, and I might say, today I hate you, or right now I hate you. And of course I would always go back, and we would try to work on things. But you have to have a safe place for people to talk about emotions. You don't make fun of them when they talk about how they feel, and never say, you shouldn't feel like that. Wow. I remember once I was talking to my mom about something, and I was a grown-up. And she said to me, well, you shouldn't feel like that. We didn't mean that. That's not the important issue. Not what you meant. What's important is how the person feel when you did it. And you never say you shouldn't feel that way, because what did I say? Emotions are valid. So we have to validate what they feel. Oh, I didn't know you felt like that. Or I'm so sorry you feel like that. What can I do to make it better? But never say you shouldn't feel that way. So we have to create a safe environment so that we can share our emotions for children and for adults. Let's move on to point 4. Talking about emotions can be risky and scary. If you've seen the show Naked and Afraid, that's how it feels when you're sharing emotions, naked and afraid. And so we have to have safe spaces to do that. Let me go on to point 4. So we talked about emotions. We talked about 1, that all emotions are valid. Number 2, that we need an emotional vocabulary. And if your vocabulary is not efficient, then let's do some vocabulary work by reading. 3, we need to make a safe place for emotions to be talked about, especially in families. Even at work, we need to do that. Lastly, let's talk about guidelines for effective use of emotions and effective discussion about emotions. The first thing is, again, to establish a vocabulary because emotions are very elusive. We may not be aware of them. We may not know how to articulate them. We may not know how to share them with other people. So we need to get an emotional vocabulary. Secondly, be aware, be self-aware, and spend time alone getting familiar with your own feelings and thoughts. I talked about the fact that we have loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is when you have a feeling that nobody knows you, nobody's interested in coming to understand you, nobody wants to be with you, and you may feel very lonely. You can be lonely in a crowd, especially if you've been to a party and you didn't know anybody there, and nobody talks to you, you may feel lonely. Aloneness is when you are apart from other human beings. You can be alone and not feel lonely. For example, I read books, I listen to music, I do many things, so when I'm alone, I don't feel lonely because I have things to think about and things to do. We all need to learn how to spend time alone, because it's when you're alone that you can become aware of your emotions, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what are your needs, and you can't do that when you're talking to people all the time. So in order to have greater emotional vocabulary, you need to spend time alone and become aware of your own feelings and your own thoughts. The person who is not aware is a person who becomes destructive. It is a person who allows other people to dominate them when they are doing things that they really don't want to do. 3, learn how to recognize the feelings of each other. Wow, that's a big one. Learn how to recognize the feelings of each other, verbal and nonverbal. Now, if you're a parent, you've already done some of this work, but you may need to do a little bit more. When you have babies, you have to become aware of how they feel without them talking. They can't tell you what they're feeling. So you listen to the way they cry. You listen to their facial expression. You look at their body, their nonverbal, and how they may be holding themselves. And all this is the way we begin to understand how our children feel. We become to understand their nonverbal cues. Well, you need to do the same thing with grown-ups. When you're talking to them, you need to be paying attention to their facial expression, their eye contact, their posture, their movement, to try to understand how they feel. You're not being a good communicator if you're only thinking about what you're feeling. You're not paying attention to how the other person is feeling, because the way they're feeling tells you how they're responding to your message. So be aware and become aware of other people's feelings and their thoughts. If you don't, of course, we're not mind readers, you can't read their minds, but you can actually ask them, oh, how are you feeling about this? Or what are you thinking about that? And that's these are techniques that I, again, use with my son, who is differently able. I will, as you can see, I love to talk, so I can talk for an hour to him. But when I visit him, I'm not there to talk an hour. I need to hear what he has to say, and often he won't volunteer it, so I'll have to make a statement, and then I'll say, well, Neil, what do you think about that? Or what do you feel about that? And then I'm opening the floor for him to discuss how he's feeling and what he's thinking, and I can know more about it. It's crucial. It is crucial to do, not only with the young, not only with the differently able, but with the elderly. Very often with the elderly, we don't give them time to talk about how they're feeling or what they may be thinking. So we may need to say, well, Mom, how do you feel about that? Or Dad, what do you think about that? So we need to come to understand how other people feel. The 4th thing is cultivate ways to talk about and manage your emotions. If you're feeling angry, you don't just shout out, I hate you, I don't like you, and I never want to see you again. You want to take time and think about what you're feeling, and then find the words to express what you're feeling. We want to find our words. For example, here's a technique that I use. I used to get very, very angry with people, and I would say things that I regretted, say things that I couldn't walk back, because once it's said, you can't take it back. It's been said. So I developed this technique. When I was very, very angry with someone, I would write a letter. Boy, I wrote a lot of letters to a lot of people, but I didn't send the letters. I would write the letter and I would say everything I wanted to say, all of the hostile feelings, and then I would put the letter in my Bible. And I would put them in my Bible because I wanted them to stay there in a place where they could cool off for a couple of weeks. Then after a couple of weeks, I would take the letter out and I would reread it. And usually the hostility and anger would be gone. And I could think about how to say my feelings in a much more palatable way, a way that the other person could hear but not damage them. So cultivate ways to talk about and manage your emotions. You certainly don't want to be a person who flies off in anger, but you also want to be someone who doesn't allow yourself to be overtaken by joy. I have an example of a friend of mine who just met a new lady friend, and he was so excited that he kind of overwhelmed her. He bought her a ring on the first meeting that they had, and he bought her a couple of dresses and spent a lot of money on her, gave her money. Now most people would think, oh wow, this is really great, but she felt smothered. She felt smothered. And so his feelings of joy are destroying the relationship. So I've been talking to my friend about how to manage those emotions. Remember that you got a lifetime, although he's 71 and she's 61, so they may feel like they don't have a lifetime, but they do. And that to slow down, take time to allow the other person to absorb and for you to become aware of your feelings. So learn how to talk about your feelings and manage them. 5, acknowledge and accept your feelings and the feelings of others. Ooh, is this important? Acknowledge the way you feel, and then deal with that feeling, deal with that emotion, accept that that's how you feel, and then decide, what do I want to do about this? Do I want to continue to feel this way, or do I want to change the way I feel? And let me give you a lesson in life. For the most part, we can't change anything. We're not in charge of anybody else. We're only in charge of ourselves. So you can choose to change the way you feel by reinterpreting your story, or you can try to make other people change the way they feel, and that's not going to happen. So be aware of how you feel, accept the way you feel, and be willing to maybe reinterpret or settle with the way you're feeling. Let's say if you're feeling joyful, then let's have joy. One day I was at work on campus and I was walking down the sidewalk, and this man came down and he was singing all by himself. He was singing loud. And I stopped him. I said, wow, you have a beautiful voice, but tell me, why are you singing? He said, I sing because if I don't sing, I won't be all right. Wow, what an insightful thing to say. He said, if I don't sing, I won't be all right. So he sang, and he sang to himself, and he sang aloud, but he was making sure that he felt fine. 6, take responsibility for your feelings. Oh, wow, this is the biggest thing in the lesson. Take responsibility for your feelings. Have you ever heard people say, well, you made me angry. Well, you made me feel depressed. Or you made me sad. Or you made me feel unliked. No. Nobody makes you feel. You don't blame your feelings on other people. You accept responsibility. I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel dejected. So you always talk about how you feel, what happened that precipitated that, and what you're going to do about it. But as long as you put your feeling on other people, you will never, ever be happy. You have to accept responsibility for making yourself happy. Sometimes people say, well, I'm looking for a person to date who will make me happy. No, if you don't make yourself happy, you're not going to ever be happy with anybody else. So take responsibility for your feelings. Don't blame other people. And don't give away your positive feelings to someone else to say, oh, they made me. No, they didn't make you happy. You are happy with them because. But don't blame other people. So we've talked about guidelines for dealing with emotions. The first one, to remember that we need emotional vocabulary. The guidelines for behavior begin with the fact that we need to develop an emotional vocabulary because we need to be able to talk about what we're feeling. 2, be self-aware. Spend time alone getting to familiar with your own feelings and thoughts. so that you can actually know what you're feeling. 3, learn how to recognize your feelings and the feelings of others. Recognize the feelings of others. Wow. You can do that by paying attention to their nonverbal, by listening to them, and we're going to have a whole lesson on listening. But learn how to recognize other people's feelings. Next, we need to cultivate ways to talk about our emotions and ways of managing our feelings. And that may mean that you need to take time to think about what you're feeling. Writing, journaling is a great way of learning to manage your emotions, because you can journal, you can write, nobody else reads them. You can become aware of what you're feeling and be much more cognizant of how you're functioning with other people. The next one is to acknowledge your feelings and accept them. If I'm feeling depressed, say to yourself, I'm feeling depressed. If I'm feeling happy, I am feeling happy. There's nothing wrong with feeling sad, depressed, angry. Those things tell us things, but there's also nothing wrong with feeling happy and joy and content. So we want to have a range of feelings. Lastly, take responsibility for your feelings. Don't ever blame other people and say, you made me feel. No, I didn't make you feel. That's the way you chose to feel. And when you want to feel another way, you will make different choices. Emotions are very central to the human experience. They help to keep us safe. If we didn't have fear, we would always be unsafe, because we would be doing things that may harm us. All emotions are useful, and they can be used in a facilitated way. Love, for example, helps us to care for each other. Sadness should alert us to problems. Anger may indicate frustration. Our emotions are alert us to the good and the bad, and so you need to pay attention to yours. If you want to learn more about emotions, take a look at a movie called In Out. It's superb. I actually watched it the first time. I came home and I ruminated over it. Then I went back and saw it 2 or 3 times, and I actually took a notebook and took notes, because it helps young people to learn about emotions. So let's go over the 4 points that we had today. The first one is that all emotions are valid. 2, there's a need for emotional vocabulary. 3, we need to make a safe place to discuss emotions. And 4, we need to keep mindful of the guidelines that help us to use our emotions effectively. So as I talked about it, see the movie In Out. And if you want to learn more, click at the bottom of this video and you will see a PowerPoint that further explains what we're doing in the video. These two are not synced together, so you're getting a little bit of different information. You may be surprised at what you will learn. This is Dr. B, and I'm talking about feelings today. I'm feeling great because I was with you, and I want to leave you with this statement from my friend, Mr. Spock: live long and prosper.